Heading East, Writing West presents works drawn from 400 years of exchange between the West and East Asia. Early modern highlights include Arnaldus Montanus' Atlas Japanensis from 1669, with information and images gained from voyages to Japan by the Dutch East India Company. Also featured are Engelbert Kempfer's The History of Japan from 1728, Jean-Baptiste Duhalde's A Description of the Empire of China and Chinese Tartary, together with the kingdoms of Korea and Tibet from 1738 to 1741, and John Nieuwhof's An Embassy from the East Indian Company of the United Provinces to the Grand Tartar Emperor of China, translated by John Ogilby in 1673. Heading East, Writing West also features 19th and early 20th century art. Hiroshige's Untitled Grand Fishes, first published in 1832, Utamaro's Portrait of a Courtesan, Kazumatsu Shiro's Pagoda in the Evening Rain, and a series of photographs by French photographer Germaine Kellerman, revealing the daily lives of the people of Japan on the eve of World War II.
The Edo period in Japan before the arrival of Commodore Perry. From 1603 to 1868, Japan was ruled by the Tokugawa shogunate, or Tokugawa Bakufu. It was a time of relative peace domestically and a time of near total isolation internationally. Nagasaki was the only port open to foreign traders, and those foreigners were limited to Dutch and Chinese merchants who were allowed to live in government-prescribed districts within the city. During the Edo period, a unique merchant or townsman culture prospered, centered on the pleasure districts and kabuki theaters of urban areas and travel along Japan's well-developed highways, especially the Tokaido. Edo period Japanese traveled for pleasure, pilgrimage, and profit. Art and print culture followed these trends, as ukiyo-e prints, illustrated books, and travel guides fostered and fed into the development of Chonin culture. A set of ukiyo-e woodblock prints. Ukiyo-e is a traditional form of Japanese art. Ukiyo may be translated as floating or living world. The "e" suffix may be translated as picture. Historically, the golden age for this form of art was during the Tenmei era from 1781 to 1788, followed by the Kansei 1789 to 1800, and the Kyowa eras 1801 to 1803, all part of the Edo culture. Makura-e, translated literally as pillow pictures, were sold freely to the public. During the Kyoho era, in 1722, the Tokugawa shogunate banned the publication of the makura-e, which they considered obscene. Japanese artists in response turned to slightly less suggestive scenes. Abuna-e, which translates literally as dangerous pictures, were meant to create erotic beauty through the medium of feminine poses, manner, and customs drawn from everyday life. This book, published in 1833, shows the 53 stations of the Tokaido as drawn by Ando Hiroshige. Tokaido, or the way facing the Eastern Ocean in English, was one of the 5 main roads of Japan that started at Nihonbashi in Edo, now called Tokyo. Tokaido connected Edo to Kyoto and had 53 stations, hostels in today's terms. Hiroshige, one of several ukiyo-e artists, depicted this route in his series of woodblock prints that he titled The 53 Stations of the Tokaido. Hiroshige is considered to be one of the best examples of ukiyo-e artists, and the term ukiyo-e translates literally to pictures of the floating world in English. At the time Hiroshige made these prints, most travel on the Tokaido was by foot. Today the Shinkansen, aka bullet train, between Tokyo and Kyoto is called the Tokaido Shinkansen and transports about 5 billion passengers annually. Utamaro Kitagawa made this portrait of a courtesan in the late 18th century.
An unidentified woodcut. This woodcut of a geisha is done by an unidentified artist. Kazumatsu Shiro, who lived from 1898 to 1991, made this image of the pagoda in the evening rain at Yanaka, 1932. Ando Hiroshige, born Ando Tokutaro in 1797, joined the studio of Utagawa Toyohiro at the age of 16. There he was given the pen name Hiroshige. After 1830, he traveled the 60 provinces of Japan, using the countryside as inspiration for his extensive corpus of individual works and prints. Among these were his large fishes, or grand fishes, published first by a judo, most of these in 1832. 10 additional prints were subsequently published by Marujin and Yamasho. These were published with Kyokashi, a guild of poets whose poems relating to the seasons appear on each print. This woodblock print by Morinobu Ishikawa, called Hotarugari, which means firefly catching in English. This image of the collapsed bridge appears in a book entitled The Great Earthquake in Japan, 1891, by the authors Milne, Burton, and Ogawa. This map of Edo, or Tokyo as we know it today, was done by Engelbert Kempfer, who lived from 1651 to 1716. It appears in his book, The History of Japan, giving an account of the ancient and present state and government of that empire, of its minerals, trees, animals, and fishes, of the chronology of the emperors, of the customs and manufactures of the natives, and of their trade with the Dutch and Chinese, together with a description of the kingdom of Siam. This image of a young lady in her finery was done by Kazumasa Ogawa and appears in his book, Photographs of Japanese Customs and Manners. This book, written by Isabella Bird and published in 1880, is entitled Unbeaten Tracks in Japan. Japan was the 4th country Bird traveled in 1878, 25 years after Commodore Perry had been to Japan. This is her 7th book. Although Japan was largely isolated from the outside world during the Edo period, China continued to have a major influence in Japan on philosophical thinking, artistic styles, and literary developments. Additionally, as the period progressed, the study of Dutch learning, or Rangaku, introduced Western medical, technological, and scientific techniques into Japan. During the 1800s, Japan's exclusion from the outside world broke down. Russian, British, and American ships made more and more frequent incursions into Japanese territory. When Commodore Matthew C. Perry arrived with his fleet of black ships, Kurofune, in 1854, the show of military might and technological strength forced the Tokugawa leaders to revoke the isolationist laws that had held since the early 1600s and to forge agreements with America and other Western countries. This image, in a book by Matthew Calbreth Perry, Narrative of the Expedition of an American Squadron to the China Seas in Japan, performed in the years 1852, 1853, and 1854 under the command of Commodore M. C. Perry. In 1853, United States battleships, commanded by Commodore Perry, entered Edo Bay, determined to open trade with Japan, either through peaceful negotiations or by force. The Tokugawa government, after intense deliberation, agreed to open 2 ports to American trade. Similar agreements are subsequently signed between Japan and Great Britain in 1854, Russia in 1855, and Holland in 1855. Commodore Perry's account of opening U.S. trade with Japan in 1854 at President Fillmore's request is the basis for Stephen Sondheim's 1976 musical Pacific Overtures, which was done in the kabuki style. This image is of a drawing entitled Prospect of the Inner Court of the Emperor's Palace at Peking. The image is part of a book that was written by John Niehoff entitled An Embassy from the East Indian Company of the United Provinces to the Grand Tartar Kam Emperor of China, delivered by their Excellencies Peter de Goyer and Jakob de Kaiser at his imperial city of Peking, wherein the cities, towns, villages, ports, rivers, etc. in their passages from Canton to Peking are ingeniously described by Mr. John Niehoff, Englished and set forth with their several sculptures by John Ogilby, Esquire.
This image is of a map entitled A General Map of Eastern and Western Tartary. It appears in a book written by Jean-Baptiste, who lived from 1674 to 1743. The book is entitled A Description of the Empire of China and Chinese Tartary, together with the kingdoms of Korea and Tibet, containing the geography and history, natural as well as civil, of those countries. Arnaldus, or Arendt, Montanus, lived from 1625 to 1683. He descended from a Protestant family of scholars and seamen from Amsterdam who had left Flanders for the Dutch Republic in the late 16th century. His grandfather Petrus worked as a translator. His grandmother Jacomina Hondius was a calligrapher and a member of an Amsterdam family well known for its work in the book trade. Montanus' father Jacob, a seaman known as Captain Eiserhand, or Iron Hand, was likely involved in the trade, becoming a member of the Guild of St. Lucas in 1622. Montanus, who had studied theology at the States College of Leyden, was appointed as a preacher to the East India Company. It was the company's reports of voyages to Japan between 1649 and 1661 that provided Montanus with the material for his work on Japan, seen here. In a conflict born in part of the religious differences between 2 scholars, Montanus' work was heavily criticized by the Jesuit priest P. Cornelius Hazard, who not only attacked Montanus' scholarship, but accused the Dutch in general as having concealed their religion for the benefit of trade. This image is of Montanus' work entitled Atlas Japanensis. Begin remarkable addresses by way of embassy from the East India Company of the United Provinces to the Emperor of Japan, containing a description of their several territories, cities, temples, and fortresses, their religions, laws, and customs, the prodigious wealth and gorgeous habits, the nature of their soil, plants, beasts, hills, rivers, and fountains, with the character of the ancient and modern Japanners, collected out of the several writings and journals by Arnaldus Montanus, and published in 1670. This image is of a war diary written by a Japanese soldier during World War II. Sergeant Murayama's war diary, translated by Robert Thornton, opens on December 19, 1942 on Guadalcanal, where he had been for nearly 5 months. On December 29th, Murayama pens a thesis for the government in which he argues that government offices and schools now in existence should be open to the common man. Land, he writes, is unevenly distributed and is the reason we are fighting today. That men continue to make war is foolish, but apparently they must fight for a right to live just as long as there are different nations. Murayama's last entry was dated January 8th, the date, according to Thornton, of the end of organized Japanese resistance on Guadalcanal. The translator, Dr. Robert D. Thornton, graduated from the U.S. Navy Japanese Language School and from the University of Colorado at Boulder. He served as a Japanese language officer for the U.S. Navy at Pearl Harbor, Guam, and Okinawa. Following World War II, Thornton taught English at Harvard, the University of Colorado at Boulder, and other universities.